hear that cold wind blowing through the limbs and the trees. And as I stare out of my window, I can see the falling of the leaves. Hello, old man winter.
Alright guys, this is Jason with the Hexes and Soldiers channel. It's been a long time since I've recorded anything in this manner. Wouldn't go so far as to call this a podcast or official Hexes and Soldiers episode, but nonetheless, I would like to share something with you guys for the holidays, and came across a book called Your Move, What Board Games Teach Us About Life. And I found out about this book on Consim World. Lo and behold, be it that I do work at a library, one of our branches had the book. And in particular, I was most interested in a chapter entitled Discovering Myself by Invading Belgium. And this is written by one of the co-authors of this book, Jonathan K. And the subtitle is Lessons from Advanced Squad Leader. And this is from chapter 14 in the book. I just thought I'd like to read it to you guys and see what you think. Rather enjoyed it myself. And again, it's the holiday season. I wanted to do something short of doing a Christmas carol, or it was the night before Christmas and all through the house type stuff. Let's consider this that. So let's just get right to it. On May 17th, 1940, as Nazi forces pushed west toward the English Channel, a small group of Belgian infantry in the town of Capelle-op-den Bosch tried to halt the Wehrmacht advance across the Willebroek to Brussels shipping canal. A crackle of Belgian machine gun fire announced the onset of hostilities. Panicked German attackers bolted back to the eastern side of the main bridge, terrified by their first real taste of combat. The battlefield went still for the moment. Minutes later, German officers rallied their troops. Squads of combat engineers led the way forward with smoke grenades, and German anti-tank and machine gun positions provided covering fire. The bulk of the force inched forward, slowly expanding a small beachhead on the western side of the canal. It was all happening too slow for the attackers' purposes, however. Belgian reinforcements were known to be approaching, including a squadron of AMC-35 tanks. The Germans' orders were to seize all Capelle-op-den Bosch that day. Even a small tactical setback in a single town could delay the wider offensive. The German force now organized itself within a row of shops lining the western side of the canal and began laying down fire against Belgian strongpoints. Meanwhile, the engineers who had spearheaded the initial assault made their way down the side streets and alleys, seeking opportunities to ambush the reinforcements. Some encircled defenders lost heart and began routing away. When a pair of Belgian tanks arrived from the west, street-fighting German infantry tossed grenades down the hatch of one and immobilized the second with an anti-tank rifle. Emboldened German rank and file began pushing forward from their positions, advancing into bloody house-to-house combat. Amid the chaos of battle, some Belgians surrendered. Others fought on before succumbing to force of numbers. A German victory seemed at hand. Yet it turned out that not all the Belgians had given up the fight. With evening coming on, a small group of holdouts, last seen fleeing into a canal keeper's office, had thrown up the Belgian colors atop a makeshift flagpole and was now sniping at the Germans from the rear. It was just a few dozen men, a fraction of the attackers' strength, but until these stalwarts were dislodged, the town could not be considered conquered territory. Muttering fiercely at his men, made preparations to bed down under fire, the German battalion commander began composing his explanations to regimental headquarters. Finishing this mission would take his tired men at least one more day. What I described in the paragraphs above did not actually happen. Yes, real German troops did attack the town on May 17th, 1940. And nevertheless, my description of the battle is wholly imaginary. The blow-by-blow account originates in a board game called Advanced Squad Leader, in which players use realistic maps and hundreds of little cardboard tokens, they call them, to refight battles from World War II. Each game is called a scenario, whose originating premise is sourced carefully from the actual fighting forces and battlefield conditions that held sway as history unfolded. My above described experience as faux German commander in the town emerges from a scenario called Belgian Tigers, designed by Peter Stuyve and Chris Mazzy on the basis of surviving historical accounts from Belgian tank crews who fought that day. In real life, the Germans won a clear victory. In the game version, I was eventually bested by an experienced Swedish player named Andreas Carlson at a 2017 ASL tournament in Copenhagen. While I've played hundreds of different tabletop games over the years, like many enthusiastic gamers, I've only one true love. For some, this is Scrabble. For others, it is Go, or Monopoly, or Dungeons and Dragons. For me, it is ASL. Always has been since the day I started playing it as a teenager. There's something about it that speaks to me. I played casually with friends in school. As an adult now in middle age, I spend much of my leisure time traveling to ASL tournaments in different parts of the world. Denmark, Israel, Cleveland, Montreal. Tabletop gaming is an important part of my life, right up there with family and work. It's not to say that I regard the outcome of these games to be important. I never gamble real money on the outcome. Even in tournament play, I know that what I'm doing has no more real world significance than a child's game of tic-tac-toe. While I am a competitive person and play to win, I take pains to ensure that my games always end with a smile and a handshake. I also know that gaming satisfies a variety of decidedly important human appetites, which is why I've joined with my co-author Joan Moriarty to write this book. Every gamer brings a different set of appetites to the table, which is why there are so many different games. The sort of person who loves, say, an empathy-driven social emulator such as Dixit is unlikely to go in for a hardcore war game like SL. Beer and pretzel college dorm strategy gamer who enjoys swindling and ego jousting as roommates is always going to prefer Chinatown over cooperative games such as Eldritch Horror. And a serious-minded, highly analytical intellectual usually will prefer the tightly controlled 8x8 arena of chess to the comic crash and burn mayhem of Galaxy Trucker. Tabletop gaming is not really one hobby. As I noted in my Scrabble chapter, it is 1,000 hobbies, each with its own rich and growing subculture. So what is it about ASL that appeals to me? Those first few paragraphs give you a clue. I'm not just playing a game. When I play, I'm telling a story. In a perfect world, I would not have to go to airless conference rooms in Copenhagen or Cleveland to produce stories through the manipulation of little cardboard counters. I'd be able to do it the way Tolstoy and Proust did it, scribbling away in a notebook. I've tried that, and it does not work for me, and I'm not a fiction writer. I try to create characters and breathe life into them. They stare back at me from the page, shrugging, shuffling around listlessly. They have no inner momentum or urgency to their actions. And so I find myself paralyzed, not being able to pick from the infinity of possible actions and thoughts that I may ascribe to them. When I play a board game, especially a richly detailed one such as ASL, the motivation is clear. It is written in the victory conditions for each scenario. I have to take a bridge, destroy a bunker, clear a town. That fictional battle in the town emerged over 7 hours and hundreds of dice rolls. All the little details from the fight would have been impossible for me to conjure out of thin air. Yet within the context of rules-bound game, Andreas and I created a sort of action movie screenplay by accident. We did it as a team, collaboratively and spontaneously, the way a jazz ensemble creates a new tune. Going in, neither of us had any idea how the movie would end, and only how it would begin. When people ask me why I never watch TV or movies, I tell them it is because board gaming takes up all my free time. That is not the whole truth. It is also the case that experience of passively watching videos bores me. After experiencing the thrill of midwifing a story right then and there on a tabletop, I refuse to go back to a form of entertainment that requires me to sit back and watch someone else's fully formed story pop out of a box. Realistically, wargames such as ASL also bring history alive by putting players in the shoes of the generals and forcing them to act out the strategic choices faced by both sides. As a Jew whose ancestors were slaughtered by Nazis, I know something about the crimes against humanity perpetrated by Hitler and his minions. I'll admit that it has felt strange to take the German side in a war game, but even that sense of unease has its educational side. Notwithstanding the monstrous nature of the Nazi regime, the young men who took up arms for the regime were flesh and blood human beings whose manner of warfare shaped the history of Europe. They and their ways deserve study for their own sake. I also am cognizant of the great privilege I experience living in a peaceful country such as Canada, where I can experience the simulation of war as an intellectual pursuit. When I play ASL, I am mindful of this. No matter who wins or loses a scenario, there always are plenty of dead on both sides. It shocks me to push myself back from the board and think that hundreds of men actually did die to capture or defend some meaningless piece of real estate. Playing ASL has, in this way, turned me into something of a pacifist. It was not just the Nazis who regarded life as cheap. I've played 1945 era ASL scenarios in which I've commanded some of the Red troops who served Stalin's totalitarian USSR and brutalized the citizenry of Berlin. In another scenario set in October of 37, 2 years before World War II even started, I commanded elements of the Japanese Expeditionary Army that descended upon the Chinese 88th Division, holed up in Shanghai's Zhebei district, and massacred them down to a man. While Nazism was a uniquely malignant force in world affairs, a close study of the period shows that evil came into full bloom in many countries and under the banner of many movements. And so the only way to immerse oneself in any kind of military reenactment is to compartmentalize the tactics from the underlying causes they served. Again, this is not for everyone, but that is why there is a Jenga. Are board gamers nerds? It's hard to generalize, but I would say that yes, during our high school years, a lot of us spent more time in a science club than an athlete or a Casanova. Especially for myself, I had difficulty making friends as a child, in part because I spent a lot of time bedridden with asthma. Even now, as an adult, I have difficulty sustaining conversations that are not about topics that interest me intellectually. I grow bored if I am not taxing my brain in some way. One of the defining aspects of ASL is that it is extraordinarily complex, which, paradoxically, is its main source of appeal for many ardent players. As many gaming friend and as my gaming friend Andy put it to me once, after an especially intense game, this is the only thing I do in life that occupies 100% of my brain and shuts everything else out. Board gaming in general, and ASL in particular, is the only thing I do in life that allows me to fuse fully my desire for intellectual stimulation with the inborn human appetite for some form of social connection. It goes beyond that. ASL, like all tabletop games, provides players with a path to self-improvement so long as you are alive to the lessons of the game board. Why, for instance, did I ultimately lose the fight for that town? When I play the battle back in my head, I realize that I'd become so elated by the prospect of victory, I carelessly forgot to assign troops to mop up defenders in the rear. This has been a recurring issue for me in ASL. I fall behind in the game, then summon up all my intellectual strength to turn the tide, only to lose at the end when I become cavalier. Moments such as this make me wonder if this is something I also do in real life. By keeping careful track of my game results over the years, I've noticed other trends. I do better in morning games than evening games, in part because I forget to eat food or drink water when I experience stress, and sometimes become fatigued or even dizzy late in the day. I prefer attacking over defending. I try to anticipate my opponent's moves by putting myself in their shoes, but often have difficulty doing so. Why? A failure in my empathic capabilities, perhaps, like all players. I sometimes blame losses on bad luck, yet take full credit for my victories. The SL game board is not just an arena of war, it is an arena of ego, of temperament, of human strengths and foibles. Learning important life lessons often can be painful or humiliating. With ASL, it is fun. One of the defining elements of the human animal is its capacity for abstract visualization. Other creatures are better than us at smelling, biting, hunting, running. We alone can create whole universes in our heads based on nothing more than thought. This is the basis of language, math, science, everything that defines human civilization. It's something monkeys and dolphins will never have. When evolutionary theorists seek to explain how this capacity for abstract thought arose, the story often goes like this. Our ancestors, beset by all sorts of deadly horrors in the African savannah, needed some way to participate in risks before the moment those risks jumped out of the bushes, red in tooth and claw. So began the slow process by which the neural networks in our head, under pressure from the ruthless mechanism of natural selection, created the means to model risk before the risk manifested itself. What would happen if I went to forage for berries in that field and a lion appeared? Would I be able to make it to the protection of that outcropping? How many berries would I be able to get? How hungry am I? Is it worth the risk? Out of these habits of mind grew the whole mental apparatus by which we play out life scenarios as a game within our mind before putting life and limb on the line in a true sense. The relationship between board games and real life is in some way close. Which brings me back to the town. When that game was over and Andreas and I had shaken hands, I confessed to him my shame in squandering victory in such a silly way. Andreas did not consent to me. He agreed that my failure to guard the rear positions had cost me the game. He also noted truthfully that in a long match such as this, it is inevitable that some errors would be made. Indeed, Andreas had made some mistakes of his own. As we went through our post-game analysis, scrutinizing the criteria that each of us had needed to achieve for victory, it became clear that Andreas had not studied the scenario with sufficient care. In particular, he did not realize that the destruction of his tanks had been one of my listed objectives. Suddenly, I realized why he had deployed his tanks in such an aggressive, even careless manner. Had the dice come up differently in the final moments of our game, he, not I, would have rued in his carelessness. When I pointed this out to Andreas, he slapped his forehead and swore in Swedish. Then he did something important. He laughed long and hard, and in that moment I realized why. This is a lesson that comes back full circle to what my co-author has concluded from showing thousands of people how to play games at Snakes and Ladders. In games, as in life, if you beat yourself up for any deviation from a self-imposed standard of perfection, you will be an unhappy person. The happiest people I know are not those who come closest to perfection in their personal lives or their professions. They are the ones who give an honest effort in everything they do, but forgive themselves when they come up short. Failure becomes an opportunity for self-improvement, not self-recrimination. Of course, laughter is not always a socially appropriate response to failure. Sometimes mistakes we make cause inconvenience, or even real pain to the people around us, which is why it is so especially gratifying to enter the world of board gaming where, win or lose, laughter is never inappropriate, because no one on either side gets shot or goes bankrupt, and the lion never gets his human prey. That is the world of the tabletop, a place where many of life's great lessons leave their mark. But the sting never lasts longer than the time it takes to put all those little pieces back in the box. That was chapter 14 from Discovering Myself by Invading Belgium by Jonathan Kay from a book called Your Move, What Board Games Teach Us About Life. I wanted to share that with you guys. But more importantly, I wanted to wish you guys a happy holidays, a Merry Christmas. Be safe. Hopefully Santa's red sack contains everything your heart desired. And I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.
I hear that cold wind blowing through the limbs and the trees, and as I stare out of my window, I can see the falling of the leaves. Hello, old man winter, I've been kind of expecting you. I have my woman here beside me, so there's no harm you can do. But I feel sorry for the people you catch alone, with no love to call their own. 'Cause only love can keep them out of your hands. You mean old winter man. You're cold, cold, cold. She keeps me warm with a sweet love. When you make things cold, her love is like fire that heats up my soul. Her arms are like a blanket that keeps me all wrapped up. I even use a little bit sugar to sweeten the coffee in my cup. I hear you blowing outside of our window pane, but to me and my baby it don't mean a thing. 'Cause we got love to keep us out of your hands. You mean old winter man. You're cold, cold winter man. I hear your cold wind blowing, but they don't bother me.